This is the Veteran Woman Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to empowering, inspiring, and encouraging veteran women to overcome their struggles and celebrate their successes. Now, here's your host, the one and only Ariel Renaud.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Veteran Woman Podcast. I am your host, Ariel Renaud, and today we have with us Brian Lewis. Welcome, Brian.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian.
I enlisted in the Navy June 9th, 1997. Went to basic training in Great Lakes. Was stationed in Orlando. Was stationed in Groton, Connecticut, where I did my initial rate training and initial submarine school. And then shipped out to Pearl Harbor to serve aboard a boat for 2 years. And then I shipped to the USS Frank Cable in Guam. While stationed aboard the Cable, I was the victim of a rape. After that, a couple of bad events happened. The command tried to keep everything quiet, and I was shipped back stateside, where I was eventually discharged August 15th, 2001, with a general discharge for a personality disorder. After many years of wandering in the wilderness, shall we say, I met my current spouse. Along the way, I received my undergraduate degree, my master's, where my thesis was written on the topic of military sexual trauma. And I just completed law school in January of this year, where my scholarship was focused again on military sexual trauma. I took the February bar exam. I'm waiting for the results now. I currently work as a student attorney at a small veteran-owned law firm that focuses on VA claims. I also do speaking engagements with a lot of military bases, trying to educate people on the effects of sexual assault in our military and how best to combat that crime within our military, because it has no place.
Right. And thank you so much for being open, because I know military sexual trauma is already hard to talk about. And then you being a male as well, that's even more stigma is attached to it.
That's correct. What we know from research conducted by the Department of Defense and by the RAND Corporation on contract to the Department of Defense is that we have about 26,000 cases of sexual assault per year. Well, actually, as of last year, I misspoke. It's about 20,000 cases of sexual assault per year. Because men are still the overwhelming majority in terms of percentage of serving, we have a military of approximately 85% men, 15% women. More men are assaulted in raw numbers. We have about 11,000 men versus 9,000 women who are assaulted each year. But in terms of frequency, more women are assaulted per year than men. The figures are currently about 6% of women are assaulted per year in the service, as opposed to about 1% of men. So it really is a crime epidemic, especially when we start talking about perpetrators, because what we know is that when men are the victim, women are the perpetrators about 40% of the time. So we really have a crime epidemic in our military that our military owes it to our country to get a hold of real quick. And they haven't done so in the last 25 years.
Now, I was a sharp advocate in the Army for about a couple of years, and I did have women report to me as well as men. So I understand, and I've heard the different stories regarding military sexual trauma. And I want to ask you, because it's not talked about a lot by men, if there's any of these questions that are uncomfortable, just let me know. Just stop me.
That's fine.
But I just want to ask you some questions, because I know people wonder. And I know other people have the questions. And just to hear from, I guess, like you say, hear from the horse's mouth. Okay. So was your military sexual trauma, was it male or female?
Mine was male. And And the reports that come forward of men, and very few men report, statistically, we're looking at a report rate for men under 10%. But in the overwhelming majority of cases that are reported, it's male-on-male perpetration. Mm-hmm. What we know about female perpetrators comes from the survey data. And in my particular case, and let's call it what it is, it was rape. It was forcible rape, violation of Article 120. My rapist was in the same chain of command I was. He served aboard my ship. He was a senior NCO. So he was my supervisor. And I was not his first victim aboard that ship. From what I know now, I was his third. Back then, I knew I was his second. And here recently, I found out that I'm his third aboard that ship. So that tells you about a breakdown in the chain of command there.
Right. Now, I know rape is about control.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to necessarily do with sexual orientation.
Correct.
But may I ask you, what is your sexual orientation?
You can ask.
But you won't answer. Okay.
I find it more advantageous to keep the focus where it belongs. And the focus is really on power and control, not about sexual orientation, not about whether he was perceived as effeminate or not perceived as effeminate or whatever the case is. Power and control is really where it begins.
And I completely understand that. Please do not take offense to it or anything. No. If you would have answered, I would have asked other follow-on questions. And like I said, it's based on things that I've heard people on the outside who don't understand the questions and the misconceptions and everything. So that's why I asked the question to get it shared. But that is totally fine.
All right. Yes, as a matter of record, yes, I am homosexual. My husband's sitting in the other room. We've been married about 2 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So your follow-on question.
Okay, so my follow-on question is, and for anybody listening, it doesn't just happen to homosexual men. It also happens to heterosexual men. Remember,
absolutely. 4 out of 5 male victims that come forward self-identify as heterosexual.
Yes, and it's about control, not about orientation. It's about control. Now, the follow-on question is, did your crew members know that I'm Army, so I'm trying to think of shipmates, crew members.
Okay, shipmates is fine.
Did they know that you were homosexual?
No. As I said, I served in the late 90s, early 2000s. So back then, don't ask, don't tell was the law. Mm-hmm. While there might have been some thoughts in the back of people's head, I did not openly share that information. However, in the spirit of openness, I should disclose that a member of the command team aboard that ship did use the don't ask, don't tell shield, as it was back then, as a sword, and intimated to me that even though I had come forward as the victim, the command could still seek to discharge me under don't ask, don't tell. So, yes, in that sense, I'm very glad that it was repealed and that homosexual men and women can proudly serve in the military today. We've just, as you know, had the first homosexual commandant of cadets nominated for the Air Force Academy, and that's a very good thing.
And that is definitely hard. That's another topic I want to talk about is, and if you're not willing to talk about it, that's okay, but is about being homosexual and being in the military, especially when the don't ask, don't tell was in effect, and then that transition, and then now, because it's still a stigma, it's still hard, you still get pushback, it's just that you might not necessarily get thrown out on those grounds, correct?
Correct. What we see is that there is an increased emphasis when a person identifies as homosexual. We see that there's a stronger look taken at them when they report a crime such as sexual assault. There was the case of the homosexual first lieutenant, I believe, in the Air Force who faced the general court-martial who came forward alleging that he was the victim of a sexual assault at a party. And upon investigation, I believe it was the commander, AFOSI, determined that he was a perpetrator instead of a victim. So we find these second looks being taken at cases where they may not have been taken if the person self-identified as a heterosexual. What we also see is some homosexual members have reported receiving reduced efficiency markings on their evaluation reports that are justified in terms of what is presented to the command, but that wouldn't be justified in the absence of attitude against homosexuals. So there's still a stigma attached, but thankfully it's not one that will get you thrown out absent another reason, which it was sorely needed.
And I know I'm kind of going down a tangent than what we originally started, but this is very important. This is another one of the stories and the points of view I like to share with my audience, because I do know a lot of homosexual males and females. So, absolutely. Can you just take this time to please dispel some of the myths of homosexuality? It's like being a homosexual male. For instance, I try to explain to people, just like being heterosexual, just because you're homosexual doesn't mean you're attracted to every male that comes in your path. Absolutely not.
I have some very good friends that are still actively serving. And the fact that I am gay means about as much to them as the fact that I am Caucasian. It's just an immutable characteristic. I promise I haven't been down their pants. I promise that I haven't been trying to hit on them. My best man at my wedding, he's a first sergeant up here in the Minnesota National Guard, Anthony St. Solver. I love him like a brother, and I've never been down his pants. So no, I'm not out there trying to get down the pants of everybody I see. I also know people who swear that they won't go in the showers because they're scared that people look, that gay men will look. Well, if I'm coming in the shower, the reason is not to use a rather earthy expression. I'm not in there to be gazing at other people's meat. I'm there to get my body clean.
Right.
So, and knowing something about your audience, something I do want to say is that the African-American community struggles with this as well. For many decades, it's been called the down low phenomenon. And the very first time I met another male survivor of sexual assault in the military, it was a black man. And he had kept his secret for over 70 years.
Wow.
Because he did not want to be labeled on the down low.
Wow.
He was more afraid of the stigma of being on the down low than he was any other stigma that could come his way.
So speaking of stigmas and being afraid to what ridicule or discriminations that you may face, how do you, for lack of better terms, how do you come out? How do you have the courage of coming out? And I apologize if that's offensive, no. if that's a negative term.
No.
Okay.
Some people are fortunate to have accepting parents. My husband is one who had very accepting parents, and coming out was not a struggle. My mother was not so accepting, and it was turbulent. Sometimes you simply have to, I guess the best words to coin a phrase from a doctor up here that we know, or that I know, is be gentle with yourself. You have to accept it. You have to be gentle about it, and then you have to come forward and speak your truth. No matter how much your voice shakes when you speak the truth, you still come forward and speak the truth.
And that also goes into the point of self-love.
Yep. Knowing
yourself, understanding yourself, and just being okay with yourself and being authentic and true to yourself and saying,
Absolutely.
This is me. Take it or leave it.
Absolutely. I'm due to speak next week at a couple of Air Force bases about sexual assault in the military, and I emailed my slides to them because they wanted to do a legal review. And my sharp presentation is kind of raw. It evokes a lot of feelings. And even though that's my style, that's not necessarily everybody's style. And when I emailed them, email my slides to them, I said, don't reject it out of hand. I'll work with you to make it worthwhile. And they came back, they said, this is a very raw presentation, but we're happy to have you. So you're right. No matter how much you want to deny yourself, you still got to stand up and be true and authentic to yourself.
So speaking of raw, I like a little controversy.
Okay.
I like a little rawness. So how are your presentations raw?
What I do is, and I don't want to give away too much of my secret.
Of course.
But what I generally do is flip the scale. Instead of trying to evoke the sympathy and trying to invoke the, oh, I'm sorry this happened to you. I turn it around and I want to evoke the, I'm angry that somebody did this to you. And I do that partly by, instead of saying this happened to me, I say this is how you get your battle buddy out of the Army after this happened. And I talk about what happens after. And it's been fairly effective. I gave the first time I gave that presentation was up here at the Minnesota National Guard Sharp Conference. Huge shout out to Chief Warrant Officer Diaz and her crowd. And her victim advocates were all senior NCOs, junior officers, and they were very angry, and it really drove the point home.
It's definitely a different take on things.
Right.
Because we do have a tendency to say, "Oh, are you okay?" or "Oh, I'm sorry that happened," or "My condolences," or whatever. So
right.
I like that different take because it reaches different people.
And that's where I think that we need to actually do some effort, is to reach those different groups. Because for the last few years, Big Army's been focused on this problem. Everybody's had focus on this problem. But we've been reaching the same people over and over again. It's time to actually look at diversifying that effort and hitting pockets that we're not hitting, because if we were hitting all the same pockets, we wouldn't have the crime rate that we do.
True. What do you feel about the bystander syndrome?
I think that it's exacerbated in the military simply because in basic, across all the services, we teach that these are our brothers and sisters, and that brothers and sisters don't do bad things to each other. So the bystander effect is exacerbated because when we look at it externally, we don't want to see that our brothers and sisters might be setting somebody up for something violent later on. We want to see a happy, loving family. So in that sense, it kind of has parallels into the incest community.
Yes.
So it's a very tough topic all the way around.
And I think, and I was speaking with someone earlier today, and I was thinking about that. I think that's why it hurts so bad, because you trust these people, especially when it's in your chain of command. You just have this inherent trust. And when that is knocked down, it just shakes up your whole world. And another thing that we also learn as advocates, a lot of times sexual assault is not the stereotypical thing that we hear or see like on TV, like in the alley, a dark alley, short skirts, whatever, and somebody beats you up and then rapes you and it's a stranger. We're in uniform. And it happens during the day.
In the military, a large percentage of rapists are known to their accusers. 4 out of 5, I believe, is right around the current number. And when you can see the face of your accuser, and you can see the face of your rapist, you can see the face of the person who's supervised you day in, day out, that betrayal comes forward and exacerbates a lot of the PTSD effect, because
you don't know who you can trust anymore. Right.
There is a lack of trust. And sometimes we go searching for that. Military sexual trauma community used to be very close knit. We all used to know each other. We'd lean on each other. And we're not that way anymore because of a lot of unfortunate events that have happened. I know for myself, I'm fortunate to have a lot of family that I've built on my own. I have, my regular blood family, but I still have family from my time in the service. I still have family that I've knit together. And it's hard. You heard me spoke about Sergeant St. Solver earlier. And I drove that friendship into the ground because I didn't know how to be a friend because I hadn't had one, and I hadn't had a close personal one like that in a long time. And it's that relational trauma that happens with survivors that makes it difficult to come back out and do what we do day in and day out.
So I know we're really talking about a heavy topic.
Absolutely.
And I know I kind of maybe caught you off guard because it wasn't scripted or anything. But I thank you so much for sharing and being open, even with the hard questions. And I can tell you are well read when it comes to military sexual trauma and even sexual orientation, the stigmas, all of that stuff. And I thank you for going around and speaking about it, especially being a male. Going around and speaking about it and bringing awareness. That is so huge. So actually, how can people book you to speak?
You can reach me on my email, skbrianlewis, BrianLewis @gmail.com. If you want to post that on your podcast, that's fine. I take invitations as my schedule allows and go from there. After you reach out by email, I'll send along my phone number, and people can and you can reach me through my email, and then we can have a voice conversation.
Okay. And what other topics do you talk about when you speak?
I focus on 3 key areas because they all intersect. I talk obviously about sexual assault. I talk about the Air Force calls it ADAP. The Army calls it ASAC, I believe. I talk a lot about alcohol, ADAP.
Okay.
I talk about
it used
ADAP.
to be called ASAP. I think it's ADAPC or something. They changed
something like
it.
That, yeah.
All these acronyms.
I talk a lot about that. And I talk about suicide awareness and prevention.
Ooh, yes, they do go together.
I always talk about the 3 key components of that because after sexual trauma in the military, a survivor, depending on which study you read, is between 4 and 9 times more likely to attempt suicide than a non-survivor. And what we also know is that alcohol, drug use, and other forms of self-mutilation go up almost by a factor of 3 after sexual assault. And those are general numbers. We don't have specific breakdown by gender. So I admit I've been in all 3 camps. I've tried to drown the memories. I've tried to kill myself. And I talk about all of that with any unit that brings me out because you have to, if you can't stop the crime cold, and I don't believe we'll ever stop the crime cold, we can drive the numbers down, but we'll never stop the crime cold. Then you have to make sure after the assault you're providing full wraparound service to the survivor.
Definitely. And that's another thing I can get on my soapbox about is how a soldier or sailor, Marine, Coast
whoever
Guardian, I don't know.
We won't say puddle pirate.
A service member can go through this trauma and then they end up abusing alcohol or drugs or, like you said, the self-mutilating behavior, the high-risk behaviors. And they get punished for those behaviors. And it's like no one stops to say what caused this or, hey, that trauma that they reported is causing this. How do we help them overcome the trauma? Or, I mean, just, it breaks my heart.
I've earned my scars. But what you're asking really is a question of command leadership. And you're asking a question about battle buddy accountability. And until we have those key concepts back in our total force, we will not get ahead of this problem. The one where we become a real family. I have a friend of mine who's in 25 Lima School down at Fort Gordon. Mm-hmm. He's in the 360
Cable Dog.
Cable Dog. And shout out to Specialist Jake Lewis down there. Good friend. And he understands what a battle buddy is because it was drilled into him early. And I think that's what's missing in our basic training. It's not the technical aspects of can you fire a weapon, even though that does count. Mm-hmm. But do you know how to look after each other? And we've lost that in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've emphasized what we've had to emphasize, shooting the enemy, getting your kill. But if you don't bring everybody back that you took over, you've got a problem. Same thing in sexual assault. If you have a victim, somebody's forgotten their word, but you can help that survivor by showing them not everyone has forgotten their word.
Right, right. And like you said, with suicide and chain of command being accountable, battle buddy accountability, part of my story, I always talk about how, we go through the suicide prevention classes, we have the gatekeepers and everything. And there was a point where I was actually working in the company, in headquarters and headquarters company. So I was working like right there by the first sergeant and everything. And plus I was a sexual assault advocate and everything. So I worked up at brigade. So pretty visible role.
Right.
And and this happened, I had been in for 11 years. And I completely changed. I had a breakdown, completely changed. Like, I literally went AWOL for about 2 weeks. But guess where I was? In my house. Right down the street from Post.
And how many people visited you?
Exactly. Completely different soldier, completely changed. I did not show up at work, and nobody knocked on my door. And I know everybody had my address because you fill out all these personal data sheets 10 billion times. I mean, right down the road, no one knocked on my door to say, "Are you okay?"
And while that was good for you in the moment because you were broke and needed the mental recharge, didn't it add to the trauma when you realized not one person cared enough about you to come and see if Staff Sergeant First Class was all right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the hardest thing for me even talking about it, is that I would literally tell people, no, you know how when you pass someone and you're like, "Hey, how you doing?" I would literally say, "I'm not doing okay. Something's wrong." And they would just keep going. And I'm sitting here like crying out for help, showing all the signs of suicide and depression. And nobody showed up. The person that did show up for me I was heavily into volunteering. So I was a CASA volunteer. My CASA director, she's the one that noticed and came knocking on my door and said, "Ariel, get in the car, give me your keys. We're taking you to the hospital." She said, "I know you're mad at me, but you're just going to have to be mad at me." And I said, "I'm not even mad. You're saving my life. I say thank you." Because because this is what I needed, because I didn't have the energy, the fortitude, whatever you want to call it, to take myself. It's as if like I could do it for other people, but I couldn't do it for myself. Like go to the emergency room or do this or recognize, how bad I was. So Absolutely. That definitely adds to the trauma, because you're like, wow. I mean, I'm sitting there right under the first sergeant. I'm sitting there right under the, my supervisor's nose, and it's like they don't care. So And it made me wonder, so how many other soldiers are going through the same thing?
A lot, as we saw last year. Early last year, Major General John Rossi hung himself after he was promoted to Space Missile Defense Command down at Redstone Arsenal. I read the public portions of his line of duty investigation, and one of the big stressors was that he continually doubted his ability to do his job and that he couldn't master the technical aspects of what was happening. And this is a 2-star general who's had 30 years of resiliency training. I'll even give you a first time. I don't usually talk about this, but not too long after what happened to me, a couple of my friends who were on a ship next to me, we were a submarine tender, so they were tied up outboard of us doing work, tried to step in and find out what was going wrong. Well, a junior officer we all knew, who essentially the Army calls green to gold, but he is an E7 that was promoted to ensign, stopped my friends and told them to go away, to leave me alone. They weren't to talk to me. They weren't to acknowledge me. And those two guys I haven't seen in over 15 years. And I still think about them just like it was yesterday. So the takeaways from both your truth and mine is that part of the culture break, part of the culture that we need to reestablish, is that the military is a family and that we are our brothers and sisters' keeper. Especially with suicide awareness, I think some good work's been done in this regard by Boone Cutler, who's very much made the Spartan Pledge part of our popular culture discussion. And it's basically 2 or more people who promised each other. It goes, I will not take my life by my own hand until I talk to my battle buddy first. My mission is to find a mission to help my warfighter family.
Wow, that just brought chills to my spine.
Doesn't it, though? I strongly encourage all your listeners to look up the Spartan Pledge on Facebook, like them, and find a battle buddy to take that pledge with, because we can't afford to keep losing our own. I don't care what the Department of Veterans Affairs says. I'm no fan of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I know we're losing more than 22 a day to suicide.
Well, I hope I haven't brought in a cloud on your day.
No, you're fine.
Because like I said, I know we're talking about heavy topics. So are you a jokester? Do you have any comedy to throw in for us to bring up the mood?
Honestly, I'll be honest with you. I enjoy the heavy discussions because it's in those heavy discussions we find out the most about ourselves.
Yes.
We find out the most about our other people. I'll even read here for a second just to make sure that I'm reading it right. A friend of mine today sent me a message. He's Air Force, we'll excuse the Air Force for a minute,
Okay, I mean, I'm excusing you message. Being part of the Navy, but that's okay.
But that's all right. Never again volunteer yourself. It's better than ain't ready for the Marines yet.
Love it.
Now, my former Air Force friend, he says to me, I'm sorry. He says, I'm sorry for having been a downer. And we were talking about the wait for the bar exam results. He's like, the wait is a test in itself. And what that message says to me when I read it, it says to me that we all have to be jokesters and we all have to be lighthearted all the time. And we can't show that things bother us. Well, that's not the case. And especially inside our personal relationships, we need to actually open up and say, you know what, I feel vulnerable. I feel this and I feel that. Because it's in those moments that we learn where our trust is. And we learn who we can trust. So, I'm obviously a policy guy. I deal a lot on the policy side, the legal side. I've been described as dour, but I wouldn't trade that because I would rather my friends who can be with me both in joy and in sorrow than to have friends who can only tolerate me in joy alone.
Ooh, powerful. I'm like holding back tears because, I mean, we've talked about so much, and I agree. I agree, because we're always being upbeat and joyful. We tend to skim over when we do talk about the hard topics. So
Right.
I enjoy being able to talk about the hard topics because so few people do, and to get down and dirty about it because people need to hear about it, because there's somebody sitting out there who needs to hear this.
Absolutely. Nothing in life really happens absent a reason. The fact that we scheduled our interview at this day and time is not by accident. It was done for a reason. You know, whatever higher power you believe in, I don't care. But it happens for a reason. And I'm hoping somebody out there actually takes the chance and calls up a person they might have forgotten, or a person they haven't talked to in a while, and say, hey, how are you? Or calls up a person they do know and says, hey, I'm feeling this. Can you talk to me for a few minutes? Take the risk and be vulnerable. You might find the rewards are much bigger than you anticipated.
Any last words of encouragement, advice, or anything you want to say before we end this discussion?
I'm fortunate to have a lot of military friends and family. You being the people sitting out there tonight, you can have some of that family back too if you want it. You don't necessarily have to find it at the VFW Hall or the Legion Hall or the DAV chapter. Come out, find a social media platform, start using it, start looking around your local school, whatever, and you will find that family again. I have my spouse, who's a great part of that family, but my spouse also understands that there are times that I need that bond of military knowledge in there to understand what in the world's going on. I'll make a plug here just because I can. I'll recommend a book called...
Just because you can. Who said you could?
You did. Do you want me to discuss your pre-brief memo? So the book is called You Can Help. It was written by a childhood sexual assault survivor. My story is featured in there at depth, along with sisters of mine, Jessica Hinvis, along with a lot of other truths about how you can actually reach out and help survivors from our own mouths, telling you how to reach out and help us. And finally, I want to remind everybody that a quote I read in a book once, the generic word for brother is brother. You're there all the time. You can't be there and not be there both at the same time. Go into it all the way, and the rewards will be that much greater. Go into it with a good heart. Be excellent to yourselves and each other.
You've been listening to the Veteran Woman Podcast. If you want to connect with Ariel and let her know what you thought of today's show, be sure to head over to www.theveteranwoman.com and follow her on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @The Veteran Woman.